This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick. This is Chapter 56, the final chapter of The Fires of Heaven, Glowing Embers, and our symbol is the snake in the wheel. The high window had more than enough room for Rand to stand in it, stretching far above his head and clearing his shoulders by 2 feet to either side. Shirt sleeves rolled up, he stared down at one of the royal palace's gardens. Avienda was trailing her hand in the fountain's redstone basin, still intrigued by so much water with no purpose but to be looked at and keep ornamental fish alive. She had been more than indignant at first when he told her she could not go chasing Trollocs through the streets. In fact, he was not sure she would be down there now if not for a quiet escort of maidens that Sulin did not think he had noticed. Neither was he supposed to have heard the white-haired maiden remind her that she was Fardar Ismai no longer, and not yet a wise one. Coatless, but wearing his hat against the sun, Matt was sitting on the coping of the basin, talking to her, no doubt probing for what she knew of whether the Aiel were preventing people from leaving. Even if Matt did decide to accept his fate, it was unlikely he would ever stop complaining about it. Asmodean sat on a bench in the shade of a red myrtle tree, playing his harp. Rand wondered whether the man knew what had happened, or suspected. He should have no memory. For him, it never happened. But who could say what one of the Forsaken knew or could reason out? A polite cough turned him away from the garden. The window where he stood was a span and a half above the floor in the west wall of the throne room, the Grand Hall, where Queens of Andor had received embassies and pronounced judgment for nearly 1,000 years. It was the only place he had thought he could be sure of watching Matt and Avienda unseen and undisturbed. Rows of white columns 20 paces high marched down the sides of the hall. The light from the tall windows in the walls mingled with colored lights from the great windows set in the arcing ceiling. Windows where the white lion alternated with portraits of early queens, of realms and scenes of great Andoran victories. Anila and Samara did not appear impressed. Rand let himself down by his fingertips. "Is there news from Bale?" Anila shrugged. "The hunt for Trollocs goes on." By her tone, the diminutive woman would have liked to be part of that. Samara's height made her seem even shorter. "Some of the city people give aid. Most hide. The city gates are held. None of the shadow-twisted will escape, I think, but I fear some of the night runners may. Myrddraal were hard to kill, and just as hard to corner. Sometimes it was easy to believe the old tales that they rode shadows and could vanish by turning sideways." "We brought you some soup," Samara said, nodding her flaxing head toward a silver tray, covered with a striped cloth, sitting on the dais that held the lion throne, carved and gilded, with huge lion's paws at the end of its legs. The throne was a massive chair at the top of 4 white marble stairs, with a strip of red carpet leading up to it. The Lion of Andor, picked out in moonstones on a field of rubies, would have stood above Morgase's head whenever she occupied that seat. "Avienda says you have not eaten yet today. It is the soup Lamel used to make for you." I thought I'd leave that there, otherwise the whole chapter would have been a read.
So I think that soup is just as bad as it always was, which makes me think it's just a terrible recipe.
Because somehow they were able to reproduce this awful soup.
Right. He's like, "Is anyone around to cook?"
I bet it's probably just like something Rand is terribly unfamiliar with, like some spices or meat or vegetable or something.
I think last time you were speculating it was some like lizard liver soup or
Could
something
be.
like that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like something that the Aiel like, but the Two Rivers folk would never get,
Right, just find it totally disgusting.
Some weird, like fish sauce or something. Some people love it, other people think it's disgusting.
Tripe.
Things like that. It's a delicacy here, but not over there.
Vegemite.
I don't even know what that stuff is.
It's a fermented yeast-like substance. Very salty.
I have heard that Australians like it, and that is all I know. It comes in a jar.
Just like it's a condiment, right? don't eat it
Makes sense.
like it's a main ingredient. It'd be like if someone said, here's some mustard, and someone's like, God, mustard's disgusting. I put it on 2 pieces of bread and ate it and didn't like it.
Well, you did it wrong.
No shit.
Rand has his 2 maidens with him, and a man approaches.
Quick question about Fates and the whole turning sideways and disappearing into shadows. We definitely see the fade that is the Shadowhuron do it, but that's the only one I think we ever actually see disappear into shadows. I was wondering if maybe that's just a rumor started because, like, there's one Murdral that can do it, and they can't all do it. But I feel like we have a lot of evidence in the series that all Murdral can do it at some point.
Devigo says, what about the one that confronts Rand in Eye of the World in the inn?
But do they just do the Batman, where they, like, step into shadows, and when you look away, they, like, run out the door?
I would buy that it's somewhere in between. Like, their powers probably aren't as powerful as, like, transporting from literally any shadow to literally any other shadow. That seems a bit overpowered, or maybe some can do more than others.
It does seem like teleporting would be really advantageous for the Fades.
Right? Like, just wait till it's nighttime and kill everyone.
Like, I don't get why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like there's some restrictions on that. Like, maybe they don't quite control it the way they should. Maybe they can, like, slip away to Shale Ghul, but they can't get in everywhere. I don't know.
It's true that that's something that we hear about, but it's only ever we only ever hear about it. It's alluded to that sometimes Murdral seem to be able to disappear when they shouldn't, but like you said, it could be a Batman.
We don't really see a Murdral POV. No. They do have that cloak that doesn't move with the wind, so, like, a non-moving cloak.
He isn't actually the knight, but, you know. Close enough.
The second Commissioner Gordon turns around, he's gone. It's not like he's teleporting or disappearing on the edge of the shadow. He's just sneaky.
Just jumps out a window or something.
That they can move along the tendrils of the Dark One's influence, that they seem to be able to appear where there are Dark Friends, right? I noticed Murdral seemed to pop in and talk to Dark Friends pretty easily, but maybe not. Maybe the shadows is a bit more euphemistic. Maybe they can appear where there are Dark Friends.
Obscure says, where the Dio looks, they can be. I like that. The conversation with Rand and Lord Bashir, who has just arrived in Camelin. The man approaching up the long red and white tiled floor was certainly no Andorman. In his short gray coat, with those baggy trousers stuffed into boots turned down at the knee, slender and only a head taller than Anila, he had a hooked beak of a nose and dark tilted eyes. Gray streaked his black hair, and a thick mustache, like down-curved horns around his wide mouth. He paused to make a leg and bow slightly, handling the curved sword at his hip gracefully, despite the fact that incongruously he carried 2 silver goblets in one hand and a sealed pottery jar in the other. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, "but there was no one to announce me." His clothes might be plain, and even travel-worn, but he had what appeared to be an ivory rod capped with a golden wolf's head thrust behind his sword belt. "I am Davram Bashir, Marshal General of Saldea. I am here to speak with the Lord Dragon, who, rumors in the city say, is here, in the royal palace. I assume that I address him?" For an instant, his eyes went to the glittering dragons twining red and gold around Rand's arms. "I am Rand al'Thor, Lord Bashir, the Dragon Reborn." Anila and Samara had moved between Rand and the man, each with a hand on the hilt of her long-bladed knife, poised to veil. "I am surprised to find a Saldean lord in Camelin, much less wanting to speak to me. In truth, I rode to Camelin to speak to Morgase, but I was put off by Lord Gabriel's toadies. King Gabriel, I should say? Or does he still live?" Bashir's tone said he doubted it, and did not care one way or the other. He did not pause. "Many in the city say Morgase is dead as well." "They're both dead," Rand said bleakly. He sat down on the throne, his head resting against the moonstone lion of Andor. The throne had been sized for women. "I killed Gabriel, but not before he killed Morgase." Bashir quirked an eyebrow. "Should I hail King Rand of Andor, then?" Rand leaned forward angrily. "Andor has always had a queen, and it still does. Elaine was daughter heir. With her mother dead, she is queen. Maybe she has to be crowned first, I don't know the law, but she is queen as far as I am concerned. I am the dragon reborn. That is as much as I want, and more. What is it you want of me, Lord Bashir? If his anger disturbed Bashir at all, the man gave no outward sign. Those tilted eyes watched Rand carefully, but not uneasily. The White Tower allowed Mazrim Taim to escape, the false dragon. He paused, then went on when Rand said nothing. Queen Tenobia did not want Saldea troubled again, so I was sent to hunt him down, once more, and put an end to him. I have followed him south for many weeks. You need not fear I've brought a foreign army into Andor. Except for an escort of 10, the rest I left camped in Brame Wood, well north of any border Andor has claimed in 200 years. But Taim is an Andor. I am sure of it. Rand leaned back again, hesitating. You cannot have him, Lord Bashir. May I ask why not, my Lord Dragon? If you wish to use Aiel to hunt him, I have no objection. My men will remain in Brame Wood until I return. As part of his plan he had not meant to reveal so soon. Delay could be costly, but he had intended to have a firm hold on the nations first, yet it might as well begin now. I am announcing an amnesty. I can channel, Lord Bashir. Why should another man be hunted down and killed or gentled because he can do what I can? I will announce that any man who can touch the true source, any man who wants to learn, can come to me and have my protection. The last battle is coming, Lord Bashir. There may not be time for any of us to go mad before, and I would not waste one man for the risk anyway. When the Trollocs came out of the Blight and the Trolloc Wars, they marched with dreadlords, men and women who wielded the power for the Shadow. We will face that again at Tarman Gaidan. I don't know how many Aes Sedai will be at my side, but I won't turn away any man who channels if he will march with me. Mazrim Taim is mine, Lord Bashir, not yours. I see, it was flatly said. You have taken Caemlyn. I hear that Tyr is yours, and Cairhien soon will be if it is not already. Do you mean to conquer the world with your Aiel and your army of men channeling the one power?
Yes.
If I must, Rand said it just as levelly. I'll welcome any ruler as an ally who welcomes me, but so far all I've seen is maneuvering for power or outright hostility. Lord Bashir, there's anarchy in Tarabon and Arad Daman, and not far from it, in Cairhien. Amadisha is eyeing Altara. The Shan-Shan, you may have heard rumors of them in Saldea, the worst are likely true. The Shan-Shan are on the other side of the world, eyeing us all. Men fighting their own petty battles with Tarman Gaidan on the horizon. We need peace. Time before the Trollocs come, before the Dark One breaks free. Time to ready ourselves. If the only way I can find time and peace for the world is to impose it, I will. I don't want to, but I will. I have read the Koreathon cycle, Bashir said. Putting the goblets under his arm for a moment, he broke the wax seal on the jar and filled them with wine. More importantly, Queen Tenobia has read the prophecies too. I cannot speak for Kandor, or Arafel, or Shinar. I believe they will come to you. Not a child in the borderlands but knows the shadow waits in the blight to descend on us, but I cannot speak for them. Nyla eyed the goblet he handed her. Nyla eyed the... Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied.
That's a tough one. Nyla
eyed the goblet he handed her suspiciously, but she climbed the stairs to hand it to Rand. In truth, Bashir continued, I cannot even speak for Saldea. Tenobia rules. I am only her general. But I think once I send a fast rider to her with a message, the return will be that Saldea marches with the Dragon Reborn. In the meanwhile, I offer you my services, and those of 9,000 Saldean horse. Rand swirled the goblet, staring down into the dark red wine. Samael and Ilion, and other Forsaken, the light alone knew where. Shan-Shan waiting across the Arath Ocean, and men here, ready to leap for their own advantage and profit, whatever it costs the world. Peace is far off yet, he said softly. It will be blood and death for some time to come. It always is, Bashir replied quietly, and Rand did not know which statement he was speaking to. Perhaps both. I just thought that was beautiful, and I needed to read the whole thing.
The conversation between Bashir, who is probably Rand's most loyal general, other than the Aiel.
Yeah.
And Rand is really, really good. I'm not going to admit how many reads took me to realize that Davram Bashir and General Bashir were the same person.
Well, fair enough. There are quite a few Bashirs.
That Fail's father and this guy this was Fail's father.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely was like, wait, really? Okay.
Hooked nose and too wide mouth was kind of...
Yeah. Well, and like, he's such a weird short dude with like the mustache and his weird... Kramer gives him this very brash voice that I really like. But I don't know, yeah. He's sort of a funny dude. Very short, little Napoleon-esque. And Rand did not know which statement he was speaking to. Perhaps both.
It was both.
I think that's absolutely both. But that's a really beautiful sentiment. That right there, I think, sort of expresses the relationship between Bashir and Rand more than anything else. That they have that little bonding moment where they want peace, but to get there, we got to kill a lot of motherfuckers.
It always is.
So this Asmodean thing, I don't know. I feel like we got to give it some historical context because this little segment became, I want to say, one of the most famous scenes in the entire series.
Who killed Asmodean?
Everyone wanted to know. This set up a mystery, and it was added to the fact that people asked, and it was like, everything you need to know is in there. You should be able to figure it out.
It is eventually, but it is not straightforward. You have to put a bunch of stuff together.
And here's what I'm assuming basically is happening, is that we know that the Four Forsaken were working together, right? Grendel, Ravine, Samuel, and Lanfear.
Yes.
And they were all probably meeting up in Camelin at this point. Well, perhaps they were in Camelin. So this is my assumption, is that Grendel was meeting with Ravine, Samuel is off in Ilion, and Lanfear is obviously tackled somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So that really leaves the only Forsaken who would be left in Camelin, besides Ravine, would be Grendel. And so I feel like that's what he's saying, is basically of the Four Forsaken who were part of this scheme, who have been talking about this entire book. You know, it's basically Samael or Grendel, because Lanfear's dead, Ravine's dead.
Kind of want to ask, how much of Grendel's reasoning have we put together? Like, why, though? Why did she kill him?
I think it's that Rand showed enough skill that they were like, we need to take out whoever's teaching him. And they kind of knew. I mean, they knew through Lanfear that Asmodean had gone over.
Yeah.
And so my basically is like, okay.
New in air quotes.
Yeah, I need to take out his source of information. So I'm not sure if it was deliberate or if he just stumbled across her. It seems like he just stumbled across her, but it also very much could be that she was laying in wait for him in particular, knowing his penchant for going for wine. So there is still some mystery around this scene, but yes, the answer is Grendel killed Asmodean. She is turned into Hessalam, last chance, killed and resurrected.
And I pretty much have to read that, so I will. Tucking his harp under his arm, Asmodean drifted away from Matt and Avienda. He enjoyed playing, but not for a pair who did not listen, much less appreciate. He was not sure what had happened that morning, and not sure he wanted to be sure. Too many Aiel had expressed surprise at seeing him, had claimed they had seen him dead. He did not want details. There was a long gash down the wall in front of him. He knew what made that sharp edge. That surface as slick as ice, smoother than any hand could have polished in 100 years. Idly, but with a shiver, too. He wondered whether being reborn in this fashion made him a new man. He did not think so. Immortality was gone. That was a gift of the Great Lord. He used that name in his head, whatever Althor demanded on his tongue. That was proof enough that he was himself. Immortality gone, he knew it must be imagination. Yet sometimes he thought he could feel time dragging at him, pulling him toward a grave he had never thought to meet, and drawing the little of Sidene he could was like drinking sewage. He was hardly sorry Lanfear was dead, Ravine either, but Lanfear especially for what she had done to him. He would laugh when each of the others died, too, and most for the last. It was not that he had been reborn as a new man at all, but he would cling to that tuft of grass on the cliff's brink as long as he could. The roots would give way eventually. The long fall would come. but until then, he was still alive. He pulled open a small door, intending to find his way to the pantry. There should be some decent wine. One step, and he stopped, the blood draining from his face. You? No! The word still hung in the air when death took him. And that's all you get.
You really have to figure it all out from context clues. And I will say, if there's one thing that really sucked me into the internet speculation on the Wheel of Time, it was this question. I got on the Wheel of Time FAQ because I Googled this question, and that's what led me down the rabbit hole of Wheel of Time speculation, probably for the first time.
Nice.
I would have a hard time saying this scene birthed the podcast, but it's certainly one of the many touchstone points on the way to the birth of the podcast. And certainly one of the things that got me really into speculating about these books.
Yeah, I didn't even know you could look stuff up online until like 2010 or something.
Well, I had just gotten like an AOL account and I was like trying to think of things to look up, and I had just had this like finish this book. And I was like, I wonder who killed Asmodean. And then like I ran into this like 20-page dissertation on all the possibilities of what was going on. I was like, oh, this book is deeper than I thought. And I think it might have also been after Lord of Chaos, because I read the first 6 books at once, so it was a little bit later than this book came out. So there was quite a bit of theory in terms of, like, there was all Lord of Chaos evidence and stuff like that people were speculating about. And were also very frustrated that another book had come out and the answer hadn't been in that book. And again, that was a solid 20 years before the answer was actually in any book.
I was going to ask what. I was trying to think while you're talking of what were a couple of the kind of big conversations we had that led to making the podcast. One was who killed Asmodean, but there was some other stuff. I feel like we had a bunch of conversations about channeling Teleran Riyadh.
Oh, you mean like what you and I used to talk about before the book?
Yeah,
before we started the
like
podcast?
drinking on the porch.
Fuck if I know.
Like years before the podcast. There was a couple of things. I remember you came up with the Crystal Throne as a Terengriel theory.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
That was a couple of years before the podcast, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because I posted that on the Reddit to see if it got any traction, to see if anyone would be interested in my theories. There's some other ones. A lot of what we did, honestly, at that point is as you're talking with someone, about half of what you're doing is trying to figure out, like, who the fuck they're referring to when they say, Grendamine Lagal, and you're like, wait, which character is that?
Oh yeah.
And then like being like, wait, didn't that happen before this? Or like, there's just a lot of, I think a big, for me, impetus for starting the podcast was the fact that I wanted some structure around our discussions, because so often would be like, wait, are you talking about Lord of Chaos, or did that happen in Fires of Heaven, or wait, which time did the women get captured? Was that Tanchico, or was it, and like we do all that stuff where we'd spend like half our discussion trying to get synced up in the books and talking about the same characters and the same events, and I was like, can we just do this in order? Can we just do this one chapter at a time?
That's like, well,
so we don't have to like
should.
get synced up.
Kind of hard to believe nobody has done this yet.
So I feel like that's sort of how the conversation went, is like so much of the conversation was overhead about like who and what we're talking about, that I was like, can't we just like do this in order? And then if we were going to do it in order, like we should make a podcast about it. And then we get drunk and talk about that for hours and hours and hours and do nothing.
No one will listen.
No one will listen. That's not... Are you kidding? That'll be years of work. There's no way we can do that.
We don't know how to make a podcast. As it turns out, that was bad. All I have is this readout, and I kind of don't want to finish the book, guys, but I guess it is 20-10.
I want to call this a Linney section, which is the best way to end Chapter 5, because it's just like a bunch of Linney sayings. I feel like Jordan was like, I'm going to save up all my wisdom for Linney at the end.
This is one of my favorite scenes. I mean, Linney's one of my favorite characters. I guess I appreciate characters often when they sort of seem above it all. Like Cadsuane I really love, Sorleia, Morgase a bit, Linney's a good example.
Characters who don't necessarily change their behavior because the world's ending. They're going to do what they're going to do just because they That's what they do.
The first two I listed are very powerful women in their own right. Katsuane's a powerful Aes Sedai, and also like high-ranking amongst them. Sorelei is a really high-ranking wise one, even though she can't channel. And Linney has crafted 3 queens of Andor. She raised them.
I don't think Morgase's mother was Queen of Andor.
Oh, I think you're right, but hasn't Linney raised 3 queens? I thought it was 3. Oh no! I can look it up really quick. Well, but that doesn't mean that...
I thought it was 3 generations of Trakand, yeah, but not necessarily 3 queens.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Linney Eltring.
A young lion charges the quickest, and when you least expect it. There's no point letting honey age too long before you eat it, and it's too late to change your mind after you've jumped off a cliff. All euphemisms, yeah.
I really like this quote that Basil Gill says right at the top of WattWiki about Linney. Basil Gill says, "I think the woman was born in Farmatting, in a thunderstorm. She probably told the thunder to be quiet. It probably did."
I mean, I think the only part of that that's actually fact is the fact that she was born in Farmatting, which explains why she and Codswain have a lot alike. It's interesting that you like those two in a similar way.
Linney, Codswain. Yeah, Sorelei doesn't fit really, but just the really powerful...
no-nonsense women, yeah.
Grandmas.
Varen's up there. Was Varen from... Yeah, she was also originally from Farmatting, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so. Varen's also in the same category.
So, where is Morgase heading?
She's heading to Linney in this scene?
I was going to say, I think she's headed to the White Cloaks, and I think here we get her reasoning for using the White Cloaks as allies. Because she has fled her people. She tried to go to Core Springs, where her general was, and he's no longer there because he fled after a pair of blue eyes. And he wouldn't want to work with her anyway because he's got some bitterness for some reason because she treated him like crap. So she moved on to look for allies, and there's just nobody. Nobody's there. Basically, they've either want nothing to do with her because she's treated them badly, or they've been driven out. And so she is crossing over into Amadicia, and the only thing that's in Amadicia are the White Cloaks. So
it's not really anywhere to go. Isn't that a big part of her reasoning?
Basically.
There's nothing to the west except ruined nations and the 2 rivers. There's nothing to the north for 1,000 miles, literally. It's just like empty land. To the other side is Cairhien, a ruined land. Tyr's Unstable was recently captured.
I do wonder if she could have gone to Cairhien, maybe, but I think she was trying to stay away from Rand.
I'll read this part. We'll see for logic. I think it is in this section. Morgase blotted sweat from her face, then tucked the handkerchief back up her sleeve and readjusted her somewhat ragged straw hat. At least she had managed to acquire a decent riding dress, though even fine gray wool was still uncomfortable in this heat. Actually, Talonvor had acquired it. Letting her horse walk, she eyed the tall young man, riding up ahead through the trees. Basil Gill's roundness emphasized how tall and fit Talonvor was. He had handed the dress to her, saying it suited her, better than the itchy thing she had fled the palace in, looking down at her, never blinking, never speaking a word of respect. Of course, she herself had decided it was not safe for anyone to know who she was, especially after discovering Gareth Bryn gone from Core Springs. Why did the man have to be off chasing barn burners when she needed him? No matter. She would do as well without him. But there was something disturbing in Talonvor's eyes when he called her simply Morgase. Sighing, she glanced back over her shoulder. Hulking Lamgwin rode watching the forest, Brienne at his side watching him as much as anything else. Her army had not grown a whit since Camelin. Too many had heard of nobles exiled for no cause and unjust laws in the capital to do more than scoff at the most casual mention of stirring a hand in support of their rightful ruler. She doubted that even knowing who spoke to them would have made a difference. So here she rode through Altara, keeping to forest as much as possible, because there seemed to be parties of armed men everywhere. Rode through the forest with a scar-faced street tough, a besotted refugee Kyrianan noblewoman, a stout innkeeper who could hardly keep from kneeling whenever she glanced at him, and a young soldier who sometimes looked at her as though she had one of those dresses she had worn for Gabriel. And Linney, of course. There was no forgetting Linney. As if thinking of her had been a summons, the old nurse heeled her horse closer. "Better to keep your eyes ahead," she said quietly. "A young lion charges quickest, and when you least expect it." "You think Talonvor is dangerous?" Morgase said sharply, and Linney gave her a sidelong considering look. "Only the way any man can be dangerous. A fine figure of a man, don't you think? More than tall enough. Strong hands, I should think. There's no point letting honey age too long before you eat it." "Linney," Morgase said warningly. The old woman had been going on this way too often of late. Talonvor was a handsome man. His hands did look strong, and he had a well-turned calf, but he was young, and she was his queen. The last thing she needed was to start looking at him as a man instead of her subject and soldier. She was about to tell Linney that, and that the woman had lost her wits if she thought she was going to take up with any man 10 years her junior. He had to be that. But Talonvor and Gil were turning back. "You hold your tongue, Linney. If you put foolish ideas into that young man's head, I will leave you somewhere." Linney's snort would have earned the highest noble in Andor time in a cell to meditate. If she still had her throne, it would. "Are you sure you want to do this, girl? It's too late to change your mind after you've jumped off the cliff." "I will find my allies where I can find them," Morgase told her stiffly. Talonvor reined up, sitting tall in his saddle. Sweat rolled down his face, but he seemed to ignore the heat. Master Gil tugged at the neck of his disc-covered jerkin, as though he wished he could have it off. "The wood gives way to farms just ahead," Talonvor said, "but it isn't likely anyone will recognize you here." Morgase met his gaze levelly. Day by day it was becoming increasingly hard to look away when he was looking at her. "Another 10 miles should take us to Cormaid. If that fellow in Sahar was not lying, there will be a ferry, and we can be on the Amadisha side before dark. Are you certain you want to do this, Morgase?" The way he said her name, no. She was letting Linney's ridiculous fancies take hold of her. It was the accursed heat. "I have made up my mind, young Talonvor," she said coolly, "and I do not expect you to question me when I have done so." She heeled her mount hard, letting the horses leap forward, break their gazes apart, letting it shove past him. He could catch up to her. She would find her allies where she found them. She would have her throne back, and woe to Gabriel, or any man who thought he could sit on it in her place. There's not much information here, but so maybe it's I'm remembering something from Lord of Chaos, but I seem to recall Morgase breaking it down in the way I did before I did that read, where she's like, well, there's nowhere to go to the west. To the north, I'd have to hike 1,000 miles before we get to Arafel or whatever, you know. To the east, there's chaos and war. To the south is the only stability that there is. Unless she's to go to Tarvalin. That's the only other option.
Which she is compelled not to, because she is irrational hate for the Aes Sedai, and the compulsion's preventing him from doing that.
Hey, I forgot about that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like chapter, I want to say 19, where she goes over her options. So that's the last time we get to see her. So it's been a minute, but that's when she and Talonvor talk about their options. And he's like, we have to go to Gareth Bryn. And she's like, fine. And then they find out it's Core Springs.
"And the glory of the light did shine upon him, and the peace of the light did he give men, binding nations to him, making one of many. Yet the shards of hearts did give wounds, and what was once did come again, in fire and in storm, splitting all in twain. For his peace was the peace of the sword, and the glory of the light did shine upon him." From Glory of the Dragon, composed by Miain Sola Hell, the Fourth Age. The end of the 5th book of The Wheel of Time.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks.
5 books down. It's pretty exciting.
You've been here the whole time. Congrats to you, too.
We both have. Yeah, congrats to us.
10 more to go.
I think this. God, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, we are 30% of the way through, approximately.
Anything to say about that final prophecy, by the way? The shards of hearts did give wounds, and was once did come again.
Yeah, I had a similar thought. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, though. Does that mean... So if there's shards of hearts, then there were broken hearts, and those broken hearts did injury to people if the shards gave wounds, right?
I'm thinking it's Rand's broken heart that leads to the return of LTT. What was once did come again. And splitting all in twain, that's splitting Rand's mind. Or, actually, right. Oh my god, of course. It's the Aiel, right? Because they split into the Shido and the rest of the Aiel. In Fire and Storm, that's the battle in Cairhien. The Shards of Hearts, he goes into the heart of the Terran Grial and finds out about the history of the Aiel. And his piece was the piece of the sword. We hear that, the piece of the sword is how he will slay the people, the dragon, with the piece of the sword. This is all referring to Aiel. Ignore everything else. Binding nations to him, those are the nations of the Aiel people, making one of many, making one Aiel people out of many. This book.
It might be my favorite. Lord of Chaos is close. I'm not sure between the two.
Well, what about Shadows Rising? Does this one win over Shadows Rising for you?
I'm actually totally going to look at the first little bit of the book here to see what is happening at the very beginning of this book.
There's so much good stuff in the Shadow Rising. It's hard to really...
Shadow Rising as well, because what I really like is the trip, meeting the Aiel, going to the Wastes, all that.
That's all Shadow Rising.
Yeah, and then Fires is really leaving the Waste.
It's the battle. And now, Fires is a lot of action. Battle of Cairhien, Lanfear, Ravine. There's a whole bunch of Nynaeve stuff that's really delightful, but it's missing Perrin.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have dream sequence in the same way that I feel like you've got the portal, the flicker scene in The Great Hunt. You've got the stone columns in Shadow Rising. That I feel like it's just... It really gets into more of his later books that become more a lot of character building and then something really exciting happening at the end.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Winter's Heart has a similar where Winter's Heart is a little slow and then cleansing right at the end. And I think that if he did a better job with this book of spreading some of the action, I feel like if the Lanfear confrontation was maybe quite a bit earlier, that it wasn't all one thing that sort of snowballed together, I would enjoy this book a little bit more. I feel like the pacing could have been stretched out just a little bit. That there's some slowness that happens with the Nynaeve stuff in the middle.
Yeah.
That if the confrontation with Lanfear, it didn't even have to be changed in necessarily book time, but if that had just been moved to earlier in the book, it would have added a little bit more of an exciting pacing to how this came together. So that's probably my biggest complaint of Fires of Heaven is that the pacing is, there's just a couple of chapters in there where I do feel like, and it's not even the circus, it's after the circus where I feel things get just a little slow and repetitive with Nynaeve. And then everything happens at once. And that's just a small pacing issue that if you just move things around a little bit, I think could have been taken care of.
I hear that.
But, I don't even notice it when I'm reading through it these days.
Yeah.
I only noticed it because we slow down because of the podcast a little bit. And so I was like, man, we have been with Nynaeve for a long time at this point in the podcast.
2 months or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But But, I mean, I remember on my first read-through, I would almost read, like, faster and more excitedly when there wasn't a ton happening. Because I'm like, okay, any second now, like, you know, it's going to drop. When's the boot going to drop?
And I just want to announce right now that Tangents of Heaven is being planned. It's once again a ladies' takeover. We've got Nin, Name Speaker, Anna, and Aradia to do an episode for you guys. So the next one will be Sans, me, and Patrick, and it'll be more of the wrap-up episode, everything we missed, what we sucked at, what we were good at, and basically whatever the hell they want to talk about. Like, just give them the microphone. Whatever they want. So, but yeah, Tangents of Heaven is coming.
The tangent episodes are literally just so that there can be an episode that is kind of about the whole book. You can talk about literally whatever you want.
And I mean, you don't want to necessarily talk about what we missed, because that would be a really short episode. Because we get everything right. Some feelings. Yeah, there's probably a lot of feelings that we don't necessarily talk about.
I'm having a little bit of jealousy. I want to be on their show.
Oh, I binged most of Picard yesterday, by the way. I'm not done. I've got 3 episodes left to go, but I did 7 of 9.
7 of 9.
But yeah, no, I'm enjoying that. Enjoying it. Because there are 9 episodes, right?
I think there's 10. I have an episode 10.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?